Jehovah's right there with you. He won't let you fall. And pray.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to Ramacro. In this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the April 2023 JW Broadcasting episode, which was hosted by governing body member Geoffrey Jackson. Now, as always, there is a lot to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
We need to recognize this basic fact. Wise decisions bring positive rewards, and wrong decisions can result in very negative consequences. Of course, all of us want to make wise decisions, but what are wise decisions?
Decisions that are wise, I'm guessing?
Wise decisions are those that please our Heavenly Father, Jehovah. Most of us have already made some very good decisions. These include the big decisions in life, such as dedicating ourselves to Jehovah and getting baptized.
Yeah, I bet nobody regrets that decision.
And deciding not to become involved in the religious and political disputes of this world. No doubt before we made those major decisions, we spent a lot of time praying about them and seeking Jehovah's direction. And we've seen His blessing in our lives because of these right decisions. In this program, though, we won't be discussing such major decisions. Rather, we'll focus on decisions that may be viewed by some as minor. However, some of these can lead to very serious consequences.
We're watching governing body member Geoffrey Jackson take us through the theme, Make Wise Decisions, and right from the get-go, we're learning that it's not as simple as just having the freedom to make your own decisions. Decisions can be either wise or unwise, depending on how the organization views them. So if it happens to be a decision such as getting baptized and pledging yourself to the organization for the rest of your life, conveniently, according to Geoffrey Jackson, who's one of the leaders of this organization, that's a fantastic decision. That's a very wise decision to this particular issue. But when it comes to other areas, this is what he's telling us towards the end there. It's not just about the major decisions we make in life, it's also about seemingly minor decisions.
We'll focus on decisions that may be viewed by some as minor. However, some of these can lead to very serious consequences.
Those words pretty much encapsulate the entire Jehovah's Witness approach to morality, to laying down guidelines and rules and restrictions on people. Geoffrey Jackson isn't just interested in having people pledge themselves to the organization for the rest of their lives. He's interested in having a say in what people do with their lives, even in minor areas or areas that others might consider minor. He is interested in micromanaging people.
Lesson 1. Just because we've done many good things in Jehovah's service doesn't mean that we'll always make wise decisions. Lesson 2. Making friendships with those who hate Jehovah can put us under pressure to make other unwise decisions. Lesson 3. Even though we may seek Jehovah's direction, we must follow it if we want to make wise decisions. Lesson 4. If we realize that we've made an unwise decision, don't keep going in the same course. Stop and change direction. These lessons can be summarized in the words of Proverbs 22 verse 3. There we're told, "The shrewd one sees the danger and conceals himself, but the inexperienced keep right on going and suffer the consequences. Yes, we need to see the possible consequences of wrong decisions and then take action to avoid them. What were some of the consequences of Jehoshaphat's unwise decisions? It nearly cost him his life. His oldest son died an apostate, and later his daughter-in-law Athaliah killed all the heirs to the throne except one baby and set herself up as queen of Judah.
Oh dear, Jehoshaphat's son died an apostate. What a terrible fate to befall him. So yes, we're learning more now about what Geoffrey Jackson means when he's talking about wise versus unwise decisions. Again, it ultimately boils down to how much control he gets or the governing body get in people's lives. And he was referring earlier to decisions not just on like a macro level or major decisions. He was talking about seemingly minor decisions in which it's important to make the wise decision or the decision that the organization would have you make. And we're learning what such a minor decision might include.
Making friendships with those who hate Jehovah can put us under pressure to make other unwise decisions.
Yeah, you don't want to make friendships with those who hate Jehovah. Because, you can't move for people like that nowadays, can you? They're everywhere, Jehovah haters. They even have merch, don't they? I hate Jehovah. They walk around the streets loudly proclaiming how much they hate Jehovah. I think, obviously, he is grossly exaggerating. He is using very loaded language. What he means when he says people who hate Jehovah is people who don't recognize my authority or the authority of the governing body. If you don't recognize the authority of the governing body and become a Jehovah's Witness or remain a Jehovah's Witness who is subservient to the governing body, you must hate Jehovah, and therefore you deserve to die at Armageddon. And why would anyone want to waste time being your friend? That's essentially the way Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged to think, and it shows in what Geoffrey Jackson is saying here. Then you have this delicious irony, which gets repeated, by the way, throughout Geoffrey Jackson's sermon, of him referring to the courage that's needed to change course if we realize we've made a wrong decision.
If we realize that we've made an unwise decision, don't keep going in the same course. Stop and change direction.
Isn't that exactly what apostates have done, Geoffrey Jackson? They have realized that they have made an unwise decision. They have stopped and they have done something about it. They've got themselves out of what they have realized is a toxic belief system, a manipulative and controlling organization. That's clearly not what he's referring to. He's referring to doing things that he doesn't like, such as, watching the wrong entertainment or choosing to associate with the wrong people or wear the wrong clothes, maybe wear ripped jeans. Whatever it is that's his personal beef, he's referring to changing your course when it comes to those decisions. But as we're going to see, his words are laden with irony when you consider the courage that's needed, the personal integrity that's needed to make the conscientious decision to stop being a believing Jehovah's Witness.
Thinking back to the illustration of the two captains, at times they may need to reverse a former unwise decision. That happened during a hurricane back in 1889. The captain of the British ship Calliope was anchored in the harbour in Apia, Western Samoa, when a hurricane started blowing. Initially, he decided, like all the other captains in the harbor, to weather the storm where he was. But as the waves grew in height and the dangers increased, the captain realized he had made the wrong decision. What did he do? He courageously reversed his decision and headed out to open sea. It was difficult, but ultimately he saved himself, his ship, and the 250 sailors on board. This bold act of courage entered him into the annals of naval history. To be like that courageous captain, at times we need to prayerfully re-examine our past decisions. These could be decisions about our employment, entertainment, education, or even where we live. When we made the original decisions, they may have seemed wise to us. But do they still seem that way now?
That's exactly what I was talking about to begin with. So earlier on, Geoffrey Jackson was talking about the need to make wise decisions, not just in major areas, but even in what others might consider minor areas. And he's just given us there more examples. So we've already heard that you're not allowed to have friends who hate Jehovah, who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. That would be an unwise decision. And now towards the end, we're learning that you need to also make wise decisions about your employment, entertainment, education, or even where you live. This is the scope of control that Geoffrey Jackson wants over you, that the governing body crave over their followers. They want to be able to influence their followers in all of these areas of life. That's enough for them. When it comes to other cults, it's all about the money. I'm thinking about groups like Scientology and NXIVM. They also have, don't get me wrong, huge amounts of control in people's personal and intimate lives. But there's a greater emphasis, I would argue, on making money in those groups and, finding a way to extract as much cash as possible from individual members. When it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses, it's not quite the same. They just get a kick. When I say they, I mean the governing body. They get a kick out of how much control they have over people's lives and the decisions they make, to the extent where you don't even really have the freedom to decide who your friends are, what your employment is, what your entertainment is. But let's return to the irony of Geoffrey Jackson reminding Jehovah's Witnesses of the courage that's needed to change course. He's given us there an analogy regarding an incident in 1889, a hurricane. And apparently there were all these ships in this harbor, and the hurricane came in, and obviously the ships were being thrown around. And the captain of the Calliope decided to go out into open water. He decided, we're going to be reduced to matchsticks if we stay here. At least our odds will improve if we can navigate, if we can try and make a break for it and head to where the sea might be a bit calmer. And as Geoffrey Jackson mentions, that proved to be a wise decision. But isn't that exactly the situation you find yourself in when you are a believing Jehovah's Witness who realizes that you're in a toxic group that is rampant with child sexual abuse, that encourages families to implode wherever there's a difference of opinion with the governing body, or wherever someone strays in any way from what the governing body requires? doesn't this analogy fit perfectly with the plight of apostates? Sometimes you need to be the one that's different. Sometimes you need to be the one that says, screw this. This is not working out for me. I am not interested in weathering any storm. I'm not interested in hanging around and seeing my family get decimated or seeing my decisions in life be so restricted needlessly. I think I'm going to make a break for it, you know. I think I'm going to roll the dice and see if my life improves if I can just get out into open water, into the world outside of Jehovah's Witnesses. Because when you're in Jehovah's Witnesses, you consider yourself to be in some kind of protective bubble, a bit like a harbour. This is my harbour. This is my safe space. You imagine that sheer doom awaits were you to get outside of that bubble, were you to go beyond the boundaries. So a little bit like in a film that I think has a wonderful metaphor when it comes to cults, The Village by M. Night Shyamalan. Similar dynamic there. You're terrified of what lies beyond. But sometimes people don't just realize that the situation they're in with Jehovah's Witnesses is undesirable. They're so desperate to make a change that they make a break for it. They give themselves permission to think for themselves for the first time in their lives. And they realize that actually, beyond the confines of Jehovah's Witnesses, there is peace, there is calm, there is, dare I say it, happiness and satisfaction in finally having the freedom to think for yourself.
Back in 2011, the April Watchtower had a special chart entitled Steps to Making Good Decisions. It listed these steps in making wise decisions. 1. Avoid being presumptuous.
Do you see yourselves as modern-day disciples, the modern-day equivalent of Jesus' disciples?
We certainly hope to follow Jesus and be his disciples.
And do you see yourselves as Jehovah God's spokespeople on earth?
That, I think, would seem to be quite presumptuous to say that we are the only spokesperson that God is using. The scriptures clearly show that someone can act in harmony with God's Spirit in giving comfort and help in the congregations.
2. Do research. 3. Pray for wisdom. 4. Make the decision. 5. Implement the decision. But then there was an additional step. 6. Review and adjust. Why is step 6 listed? Well, from time to time, we need to review decisions we've already made. As we do so, perhaps we'll come to realize that some of them were not the best decisions.
Such as getting baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Perhaps that's a decision where we can review and adjust. We've been watching governing body member Geoffrey Jackson speaking on the theme Make Wise Decisions in the April 2023 JW Broadcasting episode. I couldn't help but laugh when he started talking about the need to avoid being presumptuous in the context of what he famously said when giving evidence before the Australian Royal Commission in 2015, when pressed as to whether the governing body considers itself to be a spokesperson or spokespeople for God. All of a sudden, it was a case of, oh, well, we wouldn't want to be presumptuous. And he changed the question from, are you speaking on behalf of God, to, are you acting on behalf of God? And he said, well, of course, God can act through people who are doing acts of kindness in the congregation. Really shady, shifty behavior that was completely, in my view, disrespectful of the occasion. He's giving evidence before a government public inquiry, and he can't answer a simple question. He has one message for Jehovah's Witnesses: we are the channel that God is using, and another message entirely when it comes to facing external scrutiny. In this case, scrutiny by a public inquiry that is tasked with rooting out the cover-up of child sexual abuse. How shifty. This is the sort of man we're dealing with. This is the sort of man who believes that he has the right to tell you what sort of decisions you should be making.
In this world it can be hard not just to follow your heart, to be different and do what's right. But Jehovah tells us in his word, don't be molded by this world. He promises life in paradise. So stand tall, give your all. Jehovah's right there with you. He won't let you fall. And pray every day to climb those mountains out there standing in your way. Oh, don't live for today, live for forever. They will try and offer fame, put a spotlight on your name, raise you up for all to see.
I hate to interrupt if you were enjoying this month's music video, but I just must add some commentary. Otherwise, I do risk running foul of the copyright rules. So we've just been watching Think of Forever, the music video from the April 2023 JW Broadcasting episode. They seem to be showing this theme of a family growing up over the decades and maintaining their loyalty as Jehovah's Witnesses, interspersed with just random photographs of real Jehovah's Witnesses from Gilead classes, from conventions. Occasionally you'll see a governing body member. So very briefly we saw Fred Franz. We're seeing just towards the end there a picture of Samuel Hurd and his wife Gloria. So it's a bit weird, really. It's almost as though Jehovah's Witnesses are being tricked into thinking that these are their memories. These memories of random people are your memories that you can be proud of. You can follow in their footsteps. And it gets weirder as it continues, because it obviously, throughout the music video, gets more and more modern until we're in the present day. And you're just getting blitzed with these images of Jehovah's Witnesses at international conventions and doing preaching and what have you, with big smiles on their faces. And it all just seems very contrived, very forced. We want you to feel as though you're happy. We want you to feel as though you've made the right decision in sticking it out, in weathering the storm, even if deep down you may have realized that it's not true. And of all of the lyrics, I mean, if you read the lyrics, I have them in front of me, there isn't really anything too outstanding, but there are just those words that you heard sung towards the end in the clip I showed. They will try and offer fame, put a spotlight on your name, raise you up for all to see. So that's one of the snares, apparently, of Satan's world, is that they try to offer you fame and put a spotlight on your name. I would argue, isn't that exactly what the governing body has? The members of the governing body, don't they have a spotlight on their names? Aren't they raised up for all to see? Indeed, in this very music video, by having photographs of governing body members shown so that they get extra prominence. They're woven in there so that people can be like, oh, there's Brother Hurd. Oh, there's Brother Franz. Isn't that putting a spotlight on humans? When I was growing up in this organization, we didn't really know who the governing body were. You might have known the names if you were, I don't know, in one of the New York congregations, or you had friends who were Bethelites, or you were otherwise well connected with the Bethels or whatever. But the ordinary rank and file, we didn't really know who the governing body people were. I can remember knowing the name Milton Henschel and Jack Barr, but beyond those names, I mean, names would sort of ring a bell when people said them. Oh yeah, brother Juratz, Brother Sidlick. But you if you tried to put a face to those names, it was quite difficult. Now, because these individuals are being raised up for all to see, everyone knows who they are. So I just couldn't help but find irony in those particular lyrics.
In our next segment, a family decides to move to a foreign language field. Does this prove to be a wise decision for them? Let's see how things turn out.
Donc, on nous pas suspendre faire ça qui bien, parce que l'aile est arrivée, n'a récolté, si nous pas
quitter Fati. Si nous pas quitter Fati, pour t'en aller.
Hey you, are you ready? The Haitian community in our area was growing, and a new Haitian Creole congregation was formed nearby. We checked out their territory and saw they needed a lot of help.
Step on over.
So, should we do this?
I've been praying for more studies. I think this might just be my answer.
Yeah?
I'm in.
Good. Then as soon as we get home, we can pray about it. Our new language was exciting.
Ooh, it was exciting, their new language of Haitian Creole. So we are following the adventures of a fictional family who have decided to get involved in the foreign language field. This is a dramatization in the April 2023 JW Broadcasting episode. And I guess what irritates me, well, first of all, you have this depiction of essentially a young man being indoctrinated. Goodness knows what opportunities with higher education and to further his future prospects are being denied him because he's roped into this cult that he's been born into. But what most irritates me about this dramatization is the mixed messages. This organization apparently cannot make its mind up about what to do with the foreign language field.
In June 2020, it was announced that all branches would evaluate their foreign language and indigenous language pre-groups, groups, and congregations. The recent evaluation showed that some foreign language and indigenous language groups and congregations had existed for years and yet had few or no publishers who were dependent on the language. In other cases, the territory was very scattered, so publishers and pioneers had to travel long distances to find someone who could speak the language. Despite all of this effort, there were few Bible studies and few interested ones, if any, who attended meetings. What was Jehovah's Spirit telling us? It would be better to use our efforts in other fields. Thus, such pre-groups, groups, and congregations were dissolved. At one time, we may have thought that the largest increase was taking place in foreign language or indigenous language fields, but as we've considered the matter more carefully, it seems that congregations in the main languages of many countries are experiencing the largest numbers of newly baptized disciples.
So which is it? Is it a yay or a nay for the foreign language field? And I know what you're all saying. You're all thinking, well, hang on, Lloyd, this is now an ex-governing body member. You're showing old light. Isn't it quick? Isn't it amazing how quickly something can potentially become old light? We've just been watching a governing body update from 2021, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, a then governing body member was telling us essentially, I don't think I'm paraphrasing too much, essentially that the foreign language or indigenous language field was a waste of time. And that in order to make their blows count, Jehovah's Witnesses should be consolidating their efforts in the main language groups, or in the groups in the languages that are basically the acknowledged languages of the countries in question. And yet now we have a dramatization in 2023 that's promoting the foreign language field, showing a young family getting involved in a Haitian Creole foreign language group in their country. So again, my question would be, which is it? Are they for foreign language fields or against them? I think that there has been indecision on this in the governing body, and I think this indecision is just obvious in the mess that we've just been looking at. And I could show you at least one more example of the foreign language field being promoted after Tony Morris had given that update. I think there's indecision, and I think part of it has to do with what we see as this dramatization unfolds. I think they recognize that when Jehovah's Witnesses commit to a congregation or group where they are having to learn a language in addition to keeping up their indoctrination on a week-by-week basis, it causes problems. It takes you out of, temporarily, this unending stream, this unending flow of indoctrination that your mind is constantly subjected to as a Jehovah's Witness. When you have to suddenly start preparing for meetings in a completely different language, and you're going to meetings and so much of what's being said is just white noise, it's the perfect environment for you to start questioning things and think, hang on, do I really believe this? You know, what are my actual beliefs? That's essentially how I got into activism to begin with. That's essentially how I got out of Jehovah's Witnesses. It was by moving to Croatia and being in a situation where I was like, oh yeah, I'll learn Croatian. You know, I can do that. I'll make the transition really quickly. And it won't affect my faith one bit. And that is not what happened. It was the perfect opportunities for me to finally wake up. And as we're going to see in this dramatization, I think the governing body has at least at one point been concerned about the effect of the foreign language field when it comes to particularly young people and the need for young people to just constantly be getting their indoctrination. In other words, they want only people who are rock solid in their indoctrination to be getting involved in the foreign language. If it's a young person who needs this constant flow of indoctrination in order to develop into a Jehovah's Witness, they would rather this young person be temporarily taken out of the foreign language or have reduced involvement in the foreign language field so that their spirituality remains strong.
Besides family worship, we attended one meeting a month with our old congregation. Well, honestly, I'm a little worried about Nico. He's having a tough time adapting to our new congregation.
I get it. You know, back when we first joined a foreign language congregation, everything was fun and new. But after a little while, we noticed that our kids had lost their enthusiasm. They were still hearing about Jehovah, but honestly, they weren't learning because it wasn't in their language.
Is that why you moved back?
It was, but every family is different. We each have to decide what's best for our own.
Thanks. That's true. I found the perfect article to help us decide what to do. It mentioned the example of Daniel. He had to speak different languages every day, but he made sure to study in Hebrew, his language. The article mentioned Psalm 119:11. In my heart, I treasure up your saying. For Nico to treasure God's word in his heart, we felt he needed even more guidance in the language of his heart.
How encouraging it was to be reminded that when we make a decision, we can always make adjustments later.
Can we really, Geoffrey? If you say so. So yes, I think this is the dilemma. This is the conflict that the organization has when it comes to the foreign language field. I think on the one hand, they want to keep Jehovah's Witnesses busy, even if it's in an area of the preaching activity that isn't bearing much fruit, that isn't producing many Jehovah's Witnesses. I think similar to the cart preaching, when you walk past Jehovah's Witnesses doing cart preaching, usually no one's interested. I think it's a case of keeping Jehovah's Witnesses on the hamster wheel of activity, even if they're going nowhere, even if they're not really producing results. At least they're busy. At least their minds are focused on the organization. And I think the foreign language field has a utility for the organization in that sense. But I think they have a very real fear, as manifested in this dramatization, that the foreign language field could also have the effect of pulling people away from the organization, particularly as we see here in the case of young people who are still undergoing that process of having their minds coded with Jehovah's Witness indoctrination. And the message here for Jehovah's Witnesses seems to be, yes, the foreign language field is good. Yes, it's something that we would appreciate your help with. But the indoctrination of your children and you maintaining your own indoctrination and loyalty to the organization must always take priority.
Have you ever made a decision that seemed wise at first, but then over time, as things changed in your life, didn't seem so good?
Yes, getting baptized as a Jehovah's Witness.
Maybe you felt, I'll be a failure if I leave this assignment. Remember, Our primary concern must be to make sure that our life course continues to honor God. Have the courage to consider making a change if your circumstances have changed.
Well, that's exactly what happened. My circumstances changed in that I realized I was in a cult, and I courageously made the change of leaving the cult.
Greg and Joran Harris raised their children to love Jehovah. What decisions did they make along the way?
When a person makes a sacrifice, they give up something for something that they consider is of higher value. What kind of a price tag can you put on your child's love for Jehovah? What kind of a price tag can you put on serving Jehovah whole souled as a family?
$0, 0 cents, I guess, would be my price tag. In fact, it would be a minus value. It would be a deficit. You don't earn something as a result of being indoctrinated from childhood into Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not something where you gain anything of value. It actually is detrimental to you. We're watching, by the way, the testimony of Greg and Joran Harris in the April 2023 JW Broadcasting episode, which has been all about making wise decisions. It's not really a decision if you're a Jehovah's Witness parent when it comes to raising your children as believers. It's just something you're expected to do. And what's interesting about this particular couple's testimony is it shows the extremes that Jehovah's Witness parents are expected to go to in order to make sure their children stay the course as believers.
My dad, he gave me all I needed. He loved me so much. I would take my mother's knitting yarn and I would tie it to his door handle after he went to sleep. And I would run it across the hall to my bedroom and tie it to my big toe so that when he opened his door in the morning, I would wake up and I could be with him. That love that I had for my dad, I wanted them to love Jehovah that much. I wanted a string tied around their hearts right to Jehovah so that he was the one motivating them and he was the one waking them up spiritually every day.
It's just blatant manipulation, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure all of this is true, by the way. I'm sure Greg Harris isn't lying when he's telling this touching story about yarn or spinning a yarn. I don't think he's spinning a yarn. I think it's a genuine story about yarn. It's a yarn-related yarn. But I think this happened. It's just that it's so clearly emotional propaganda because you have this sentimental piano music playing in the background, and the objective, as always, is to string the viewer along emotionally so that they don't have to think about any of this. Because when you do start to think about it, like yarn, it quickly unravels. So his analogy is of him tying himself to his dad with yarn so that they would wake up at the same time. The analogy breaks down because it was his decision to tie yarn between him and his dad. It would be a bit weirder if it was his dad who was tying his toe to his dad's toe. That would be weird, wouldn't it? And that's actually what he's describing there. He wanted to tie effectively some kind of yarn or bond around his children's hearts. So it's switched, hasn't it, between the child initiating it and the parent initiating it. So the analogy actually doesn't work. But you don't have time to think about that when you're a Jehovah's Witness. You're too busy feeling all warm and mushy inside due to the sentimental piano music and the touching story about a guy who really loved his dad.
Jesus said, obviously, we can't slave for two masters. And I've tried to do that, and believe me, it does not work. Like any father, I wanted to have a home for my family. My profession was building houses, but that cost me my pioneering. And so I decided I had to quit building houses. And so I did. I started to do remodel jobs, and we looked for a place that we could afford that would sustain us in the full-time service. And Jehovah provided exactly what we needed.
One of the highlights of raising the children was the annual visits to unassigned territory. The success in the ministry was phenomenal.
When we would go out of the country to preach, we would often stay with family members of our Bible students or our brothers and sisters in these countries in some very humble surroundings. And we took advantage of the hospitality that they offered us because we wanted to live the culture with them. It just opened our eyes to a world that we never knew existed. When we pray to Jehovah, thinking about our family being able to serve him like this, we just say thank you. We just try in some way to express how deeply we feel about this privilege that we have to be with Karsten and Shersti and Andrea and Dimo. We don't deserve any of these blessings from Jehovah, but somehow he's blessed our efforts and he's given us an opportunity to smile and reflect on all of the things that he's done for us. And what can we do to repay Jehovah but just keep going, keep trying, and keep moving forward until we're on the other side.
Thank you, Brother and Sister Harris, for sharing your experience in such a heartfelt way. You decided to put spiritual things first in your children's lives and gave them the chance to have a friendship with Jehovah.
Yes, you decided to indoctrinate your children into the Jehovah's Witness organization, even to the extent of quitting your full-time job so that you could spend more time preaching with your children. That's what we've just heard. I don't think I've misinterpreted things. He's describing leaving his profession of building houses as a father of two in favor of pioneering, in other words, dedicating a set amount of time every month for free to recruiting for Jehovah's Witnesses.
My profession was building houses, but that cost me my pioneering.
That cost you your pioneering. Your profession cost you your voluntary work for an organization. It should be the other way round. I mean, that sentence would make sense if you were talking to someone and they were saying, well, I was doing voluntary work for this organization, but it cost me my profession. You would have sympathy for that person. That would be a terrible thing. But isn't it amazing how when you're in a cult, things can get so twisted that a believing Jehovah's Witness will be thinking, oh no, his profession that was allowing him to put bread on the table for his young family, his profession was getting in the way of him doing preaching work for free for the organization. In my opinion, this is entirely irresponsible advice to be giving to parents. Imagine how many Jehovah's Witness parents are going to be watching this, and those who are in full-time employment so that they can put bread on the table for their children are going to be feeling guilty because they're not pioneering. It's just so messed up. And you also have this story of them going around to different countries. You even have a photograph, I think maybe Tibor can overlay if he's gracious, of them doing door-to-door work with their apparently teenage children in other countries. Look, I guess you'd have to ask the kids who are now grown up whether there's any way in which that set them back. whether it impacted on their schooling, assuming they even went to school. For all I know, they were homeschooled. We don't know. You'd have to ask the kids whether they suffered in any way in terms of their development. And even then, I'm not sure you'd get an honest answer, because obviously the whole point was to indoctrinate the children, and you're not really in a position to objectively say whether you suffered any detriment if you're biased towards this organization you've been raised in. It just, for me, seems to be very disturbing and chilling that this is the benchmark that's being set for Jehovah's Witness parents.
If we don't like who we are now, we can change. As we'll see in the latest installment of Where Are They Now?
Hello, who is it? Hey, hi, how are you? Okay, come on up. My name is Enrique Torres Jr. I live in Staten Island, New York, and I have the privilege to serve in the Mid-Island congregation. The first 40 years of my life were marred in a lifestyle that was horrendous. A judge stated that I had a propensity for criminality. Well, no doubt he was describing a vicious person.
Hold on a minute. Did we just see the word homicide flash on our screen? Maybe if Tibor is gracious, we can have that overlaid again. Yes, I'm pretty sure that says homicide, which is literally killing someone. So, welcome to Enrique Torres Jr., who is a killer. I'm not making this up. You can actually look up his story, as I have done. It's featured in The Awake of 1999, August 8th, pages 11 and 12. I'll read some of it for you. In 1963, I was released on parole, but soon I was again arrested for burglary, and I served 2 years in prison on Rikers Island in New York City. I was released in 1965. Yet that very year, I was arrested for murder. What a ferocious, lion-like disposition I had developed! ! The court sentenced me to 20 years at Dannemora in upstate New York. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. There I became involved in the prison subculture. That's a really odd way of saying I killed someone. There's no real remorse in that, is there? So instead of just saying I killed someone, he's saying I was arrested for murder and then I was sentenced to 20 years, which means you were convicted, which means you did murder someone. I mean, if you want to deny it, if you want to say that the conviction was unfair, this is your story. Feel free to put the record straight. But either you killed someone or you didn't. If you didn't kill someone and there was a miscarriage of justice, why don't you say that? And if you did kill someone, why aren't you expressing more remorse? Isn't it weird for him to mention the murder and immediately in his life story, I think this particular line was not written by him, if I'm being completely honest. Imagine someone saying, yeah, I killed a guy, and then the very next words that come out of their mouth are, what a ferocious, lion-like disposition I had developed. And don't get me wrong, we all get to make mistakes and start afresh, especially in this case, where someone has been sentenced and convicted and gone through the criminal process, been subjected to the rule of law. But why aren't we seeing more remorse on this individual, either in his video interview some decades later or in the original life story, if you look it up and read it, it's almost as though the organization doesn't care that much whether he killed a guy and whether he's sorry about killing a guy, so long as he is now a loyal Jehovah's Witness who's also willing to share his story, the typical trope of someone who leads a life of debauchery and heinous acts before being blessed with the privilege of becoming a Jehovah's Witness.
I did get in contact with my father, and he told me, never forget Jehovah. That was his name, and that's all I got out of it. I knew that there was nobody that could help me but God. So that's when I found myself in prayer to Jehovah. I vowed that I would make it my business to learn more about him than just his name. At that time, that's all I knew. So one of the main challenges that I'm facing is that I have developed cancer and have gone through 4 cancer operations and also some chemotherapy. Without relying upon Jehovah to help me to overcome these challenges, there's no doubt in my mind that I never would have been able to make it.
Absolute rubbish. So we've just been listening again to Enrique Torres Jr., nearly said Enrique Iglesias. No, it was not that Enrique. Enrique Torres Jr., who is a convicted felon, in fact, a convicted murderer. If you read between the lines, he's actually killed. He's actually taken human life. And he's talking here about his cancer. Obviously, I sympathize with anyone who has or has suffered with or has died from cancer, as someone who lost his own mother to cancer. So cancer's kind of a difficult word for me. Whenever someone raises that particular word, I'm immediately on edge due to my own experience. But I can tell you now, people do beat cancer. People do go through chemotherapy and the various treatments without being Jehovah's Witnesses, without having to rely upon their faith as Jehovah's Witnesses. It's an insult to suggest otherwise. What did he say exactly? Without relying upon Jehovah to help me overcome these challenges, cancer operations and chemotherapy, he's referring to as challenges, there's no doubt in my mind that I never would have been able to make it. He wouldn't have been able to make it. What about the medicine itself and the skill of the surgeons? Where do they factor in? Are they of so little consequence where they don't get credit? All of the credit apparently goes to Jehovah, or his reliance upon Jehovah, for the cancer operations, the chemotherapy, and his ability to get through them all. And we're talking, by the way, again, and I'm only stressing this point because he is expressing, at least in what we've seen, so little remorse. We're talking about someone who killed another human being. Apparently, Jehovah needs to give him help to get through his cancer. Where was he for the murder victim? Where was he when Enrique was taking the life of another human being? Why didn't he intercede then? And in some way give Enrique the compassion and humanity that he needed to not commit that crime. This is the problem you have when you start invoking the supernatural in this way. You run into all sorts of problems. And again, I'm not in any way suggesting that there's no way forward for Enrique. There needs to be. He served his time. He went through the criminal justice system. He was sentenced. He was convicted. He served time. So he needs to be, everyone deserves a second chance, is what I'm saying. But how can you then pivot to talking about your own battle with cancer and about how you couldn't have made it through the challenge of receiving the benefit of modern medicine without God being involved in some way? You can see the problem, can't you? And in my view, it's not just a problem. It's not just something that doesn't make sense. It's words spoken by Enrique that insult the many thousands every year who go through cancer treatments, who go through chemotherapy, and are able to fight that battle without being reliant upon the Jehovah's Witness religion.
What's the lesson? Well, the lesson is that things happen at times that makes peace go away. Sometimes brothers in the congregation at Bethel on a construction site may react like Ephraimites. Sometimes we react like Ephraimites. Why didn't you ask my opinion? I was supposed to be involved in this. Why'd you call me last minute when you knew you needed this 2 weeks ago, and now I have to drop everything and help you out? See, that happens. We're only human. Well, when it happens, how will we react? You see, unity is more important than who is right and who is wrong. And Gideon understood that simple truth. And unity is so important today. It was interesting, a beautiful Watchtower article, 2014, December 15th, and the article was entitled, "Facing the End of This Old World Together," and it stated this. It said, "One of the darkest periods in human history nears. For God's people, it will be a time for unity." It goes on to say, during the coming time of trouble for this system, we will have to be truly united. So let me ask you, do you think it's any coincidence that here, where we are in the stream of time, that we see Jehovah pulling his organization closer and closer together in unity? Is it any coincidence that we hear over and over again the need for peace and for unity? No. You see, as this world gets more and more divided, fragmented, fighting, we need to pull tighter and tighter together in unity. And that requires that all of us work on these beautiful qualities of humility, mildness, and patience.
We've been hearing from governing body helper Robert Lucioni, who makes a cameo in the April 2023 JW Broadcasting episode. This is obviously a segment where he is giving comments at a morning worship before Bethelites, and it's somehow been included in this particular month's JW Broadcasting episode. Those words are still echoing in my ears. This is exactly the mentality that's expected of you as a Jehovah's Witness.
You see, unity is more important than who is right and who is wrong. And Gideon understood that simple truth.
Unity is more important than who is right and who is wrong. Wow. Well, we all know that that's how it works in the Jehovah's Witness religion, but I guess, thank you, Robert Lucioni, for putting it so blatantly as a simple truth that's just a given. This is, for me, the beauty of morning worship talks in particular, because he's giving his talk, or this little sermon, in front of the Bethel family. So he's not getting any pushback. He knows he can just say stuff and it will all make total sense. He's not necessarily knowing that this particular morning worship will be used in a JW Broadcasting episode, or may perhaps be watched by people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses and haven't been indoctrinated, so that his words are nonsensical. Unity is more important than who is right and who is wrong. What if the governing body is wrong? What if the faithful and discreet slave, self-appointed, what if they're wrong? What if it's not God's channel? according to his logic and this reasoning that should just be commonly accepted, it's a simple truth. According to Robert Lucioni's logic, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether the governing body is wrong, because what comes first is unity. It matters that we're together. We may all be wrong, but at least we're all wrong together. And then there's this bizarre, do you think this is any coincidence thing?
So let me ask you, do you think it's any coincidence that here, where we are in the stream of time, that we see Jehovah pulling his organization closer and closer together in unity? Is it any coincidence?
Isn't it any coincidence? In what way? He starts making an argument about this being unique, or this being an interesting anomaly in the stream of time. And then it's almost like he forgets his point and just goes wandering off. It's so incoherent. It's not a coincidence. It's exactly what you would expect of an organization that is repeatedly, as you then go on to argue, reminding its followers of the need for unity. There's no coincidence at all in that context. I know what you mean, by the way. What you mean is, this must be God's organization because look at how much unity there is. That's essentially the point he's trying to make, rather clumsily. But isn't that what all cults have? Don't all cults either have or strive for unity, where everyone needs to be of the same mind? If anything, the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses are continually harping on about unity and sending out letters shaming Jehovah's Witnesses for not yet coming back to the meetings in person and staying on Zoom, and the whole thing about the COVID vaccine, I mean, obviously I'm pro-vaccine, but there was a real issue there with unity, where very clearly a huge percentage of Jehovah's Witnesses were anti-vaxxers, to the point where the organization had to put their foot down and start telling, or very strongly suggesting, that certainly Bethelites as a minimum needed to be vaccinated. Where was the unity there? You know, the more you have to impose unity, the more you're showing that basically you have a problem when it comes to unity. You're having to put your foot down to correct this issue where not everyone is on the same page, which is entirely what you can expect in a man-made religious organization or any kind of organization. There are always going to be, to some extent, people pulling in different directions, so that there needs to be authority imposed. But no, there is absolutely no coincidence that there is some form of unity in the Jehovah's Witness religion, albeit not an absolute unity, but it is still unity. No coincidence whatsoever, because that's what all cults strive for.
Well, again, what can help us to not be an obstacle to unity? Humility, mildness, patience, just what we're considering in Ephesians chapter 4. You see, we have to have the confidence that if it's important to Jehovah, it'll happen. And if not, what a shame it would be if we become an obstacle to unity over something that's not that important to Jehovah. You see, brothers and sisters, we need the Gideons to help us in our support of the governing body. Gideon was such a beautiful example. Once he understood Jehovah's direction, he was willing to run into the fire for Jehovah and for his organization. That's what we need. We need Gideons. We don't need any more Ephraimites.
He literally said, we need Jehovah's Witnesses to be ready to receive instructions and run into the fire for the organization. I'm not exaggerating, am I? I'm not going crazy. That is what he just said. That's disturbing, isn't it? That's a very sinister way of thinking that takes you to all sorts of dark outcomes. If we're thinking about the history of cults, groups like Jonestown, for example, or what happened at Jonestown. Of course, instructions need to make sense. You do not just have unity for the sake of unity, but Robert Lucioni is very much arguing for unity for the sake of unity. He's saying, we need people to be like Gideon. I spared you the whole stuff where he was reading various Bible verses about Gideon, because frankly, that was really, really boring, a really boring part of his talk. But he's saying we need people to be like Gideon, who aren't obstacles to unity once they understand what the organization wants from them. They're willing to run into the fire. I mean, that's chilling.
As Jehovah's Witnesses, we cherish our privilege to share the good news with others. What can help us be adaptable in our ministry? Please enjoy the latest installment of Iron Sharpens Iron.
Hi, I am Michalis, and this is Iron Sharpens Iron. One challenge that often makes me nervous is when I've prepared an introduction, I've planned the conversation, but the householder doesn't follow the plan, and I have to adapt. Have you ever had that experience?
No, not really, because conversations aren't supposed to be planned.
So we're going to discuss 4 tips that have helped me and hopefully will help you be more adaptable. The 4 tips are: 1. Know your territory. 2. Make use of the teaching toolbox. 3. Anticipate common objections or questions. And 4. Be flexible. Adjust to the householder's needs. Because remember, this is meant to be a conversation, not a sermon or a sales pitch.
No, it can't be a sermon or a sales pitch. This is a genuine conversation that's been planned. You couldn't make this up, could you? So we are watching Michalis, who is a circuit overseer. He's presenting the latest installment in the hit series Iron Sharpens Iron, essentially a series in which a circuit overseer is someone who goes around and visits various congregations to make sure they're all doing things properly and not being naughty. A circuit overseer gives tips on how to do the preaching work. And I just love the fact that Michalis is talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's talking about how we wouldn't want this to be like a sales pitch. But on the other hand, he's talking about how the conversation needs to be planned and how it can be frustrating if a conversation doesn't go the way you've planned it to go. Again, it's not really a true conversation, is it? If you want it to go in a certain direction, if you have a plan for it. What he's describing here, very obviously, is preaching, and he's essentially bemoaning the fact that sometimes people have a mind of their own, and sometimes people might not respond to Jehovah's Witnesses in a way that fits in with their plan.
Good morning. Many people in our area struggle to make ends meet. Do you think there will ever be a time when we won't have to stress about money?
Actually, now isn't a good time. I just received some bad news.
I'm sorry. We'll come back another time then.
Thank you.
Okay, our sister applied our first 2 tips really well. But our sisters are usually excellent when it comes to the ministry, so no real surprises there.
Yeah, good for you, sisters. Good for you, ladies. You're really good at preaching, aren't you? And cleaning the Kingdom Hall. Those are pretty much the things that you're good at. We'd prefer you don't do teaching or speaking on the platform. We'd prefer you don't have any positions of actual authority. But hey, it turns out you're really good at preaching. Good for you.
I'm sorry. Is there anything we can do to help?
No. I just heard my sister has cancer.
Oh, that must be so difficult. For your sister and for you.
Yes, when someone we love is suffering, we can often feel helpless.
That's exactly how I feel.
What are the chances that someone who randomly knocks at your door will instinctively know that when someone you care about and love is suffering, you will feel helpless? That's such profound wisdom.
If you have a moment, could I show you something that I find comforting? About a time in the near future when our loved ones will never suffer again.
I'd like that.
Notice what the Bible says at Revelation 21 verses 3 and 4. With that, I heard a loud voice from the throne say, "Look."
Wow. Did you see how she was able to offer this woman real comfort? Just by being adaptable? All it took was one simple question. Is there anything we can do to help? She was sincere and friendly, and the householder responded. At that point, our sister applied our third tip. She obviously was familiar with some common anxieties of ones in that territory, because she smoothly transitioned to the topic of suffering, which allowed her to listen to the householder's real concern and then implement our fourth tip. She adjusted to meet those needs.
So again, we're watching the latest installment of Iron Sharpens Iron. Michalis, who is a Jehovah's Witness circuit overseer, is telling us about the art of having conversations that happen to be planned. But this is where this particular installment really angers me, all jokes aside, because what we're seeing here is Jehovah's Witnesses being encouraged to capitalize on cancer, on someone's suffering, on someone being in a vulnerable state because their friend is suffering or their friend has a life-threatening disease. Let's capitalize on that. Let's use that as an opportunity to push our religion. What does it say about your religion if you need to resort to such shady tactics? And they're on open display here. And I also found it interesting, because I don't want to dwell on the whole cancer thing too much. It really enrages me. But just a little bit of housekeeping. Towards the beginning of this Iron Sharpens Iron episode, Michalis referred to 4 different skills that Jehovah's Witnesses should be cultivating. Maybe if Tibor is gracious, we can just see a still of the 4 steps, I should say, that Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged to try in order to improve their conversation skills. Look at step 3. Anticipate common objections or questions. Now, when I was first watching this, I saw that step and I thought, this is going to be interesting. I wonder what they're going to use as an example of a common objection or question, because I've now been speaking to Jehovah's Witnesses quite a lot as part of my work on this channel. In fact, if Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear to my last conversation with a Jehovah's Witness, with a believing Jehovah's Witness. So I'm kind of getting very used to the way Jehovah's Witnesses preach now, not just how they preached when I was a Jehovah's Witness, but how they actually preach now. And what I'm finding when I'm speaking to Jehovah's Witnesses is they don't have the first clue how to deal with genuine objections, genuine informed objections and criticisms to their beliefs. They don't have the first clue. They will either try to change the subject, or in some cases, as you'll see in my Talking with Jehovah's Witnesses series, they will outright lie, to the point where I'm fact-checking them on the screen and showing how their words contradict what is in Jehovah's Witness publications. So when I saw Michaelis's magical list of 4 steps, and I saw step number 3, anticipate common objections or questions, I was thinking, well, this will be good. I wonder what example he's got. You know, what actual genuine objection or question is he going to prepare Jehovah's Witnesses to handle? And what we got was this.
All it took was one simple question. Is there anything we can do to help? She was sincere and friendly, and the householder responded. At that point, our sister applied our 3rd tip. She obviously was familiar with some common anxieties of ones in that territory.
She was familiar with some common anxieties of people in her territory. That wasn't the step, Michaelis. The step wasn't anticipate common anxieties. You've just moved the goalposts. You've changed your own step. This guy is a circuit overseer and he can't keep his story straight. So he's telling us that an important step is to anticipate common objections or questions, and he's changed it to anticipate common anxieties. And the only thing you need to do in order to do that is just say, is there anything I can do to help? That's it. So thank you, I guess, for showing us how ill-equipped Jehovah's Witnesses are when it comes to their preaching work. If you're wondering why they are so evasive and so hopeless when it comes to responding to genuine criticisms and genuine objections to the Jehovah's Witness belief system, it's because they're getting appalling advice like this. Anyway, there we have it. Thus concludes not just this particular rebuttal to the April 2023 JW Broadcasting episode, thus concludes the final Ramacro rebuttal. This is the last rebuttal I am filming in this studio in Ramacro. After this rebuttal, within a few days, we'll start packing up the books and moving the equipment back to the attic, which is essentially my apartment. So expect to see a different backdrop in future rebuttals. But I am a little bit nostalgic because I've obviously spent a lot of time in this room over the last few months, filming not just rebuttals, but various other videos and doing interviews and what have you. And I'm very, very grateful that we were able to rent this space for the period that we were able to rent it. I'm grateful for the help of the patrons who support this channel. Obviously, it's been a bit rough in recent times, and we're trying to adjust. We're trying to be a little bit more nimble and cut costs, basically, is what we're doing. So there's nothing too sad happening. This is essentially progress, isn't it? But I can't help but feel a little bit nostalgic. But the books are coming with me. The books go wherever I go. But that's all we have time for. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.